In East Africa, the Arabs have already disgraced Islam. They had started a slave trade 600 years before the European. In this slave trade, after they lost Spain, preying on nations in Africa, had drained Africa of so much time and energy and resources and organization, the Africans now could not mount an offense against Europe. Now we see
Hello guys, I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. This is AfriPost and welcome to today's video. You know, much of history in the United States has always been told differently to different people. The whites in America have a history that they believe is true. Blacks in America also have a certain history when it comes to how they lived and how they interacted with whites in America. And in this video, I came across a discussion when it comes to understanding the history of black people in the United States and the history of Africans in African continent. So let's watch this video, then come back.
in East Africa, the Arabs have already disgraced Islam. They had started a slave trade 600 years before the European. In this slave trade, after they lost Spain, preying on nations in Africa, had drained Africa of so much time and energy and resources and organization, the Africans now could not mount an offense against Europe. Now we see the enemies that the Arabs that we had installed in Spain and the Mediterranean, because the military arm was African, turning on us. Now this is bigger than my skimpy explanation, because every ally we ever had has turned on us when it was his or her convenient to do so, left or right, and there is no exception. Now the Arabs have turned on the Africans, moved down from North Africa and destroyed the great nation states in inner Africa. Now they would increase the slave trade along the coast of West Africa, the Portuguese and the Spaniards. Africa is in a bind now. East Africa is controlled by Arab slave traders. North Africa is controlled by Africans and Arabs returning from the conquest of Spain now that they've lost Spain. West Africa is arguing among themselves because they can't settle their family dispute. They will make a mistake by inviting the Portuguese to arbitrate their family dispute. Now, I've said this before, if you didn't learn anything from Godfather 1 and 2, you never, absolutely never invite an outsider to settle a family dispute. Never. Sober up old drunken Uncle Willie and let him settle it. But it must be somebody from within the family. Now the African is in a bind by the European. Now let us explain something that a whole lot of people have got misconceptions about, whether the Africans had slavery before the Europeans. In the European sense, no. Servitude is not slavery. They had worse servitude here in the United States, whites against whites. Many times the Africans in wars or difficulties would capture other African groups. These groups would have to work their way out of indenture, either tending cattle or doing something. Some groups built up a surplus of labor. The Africans had no big ships to take from Africans down the coast. So he knew a king further down who needed some labor. Now that the Portuguese are there, he hired some of the Portuguese to take these Africans from one part of Africa and another. Now the European is interpreting this as meaning the African was in the slave trade. The African was not in the slave trade, and you let people beat you over the head with nonsense because you have not studied African culture to understand that the nature of African servitude, one to the other, had no relationship to the slave trade, that the slave trade was the greatest holocaust, the greatest drainage on a people in the history of the world. Africans had no ships that he could connect 3 continents. And even if the African was in the slave trade, he could not have brought it off. He didn't have a ship that would hold 100 people along the coast. Most of big fishing boats and river boats. So he could never have brought off anything as massive as the Western slave trade. Couldn't have done it if he wanted to. Didn't have the facility anyway. I am not saying Africans were right in imprisoning their in holding their prisoners of war and making their prisoners of war work for them. Well, that's better than killing them, but I'm saying that they made a symbolic mistake and a tactical mistake when they hired the Portuguese to take captives from one part of Africa to the other and gave the Portuguese the illusion that they were in the same trade and had the same intentions for enslavement as the Portuguese. That was a mistake. It was a mistake because we did not know the European culture and we did not know the European mentality. Didn't know it then, don't know it now. Otherwise, you would behave differently. The Africans came from a society that was collective. The European came from a society that was individual. 2 kinds of temperaments, 2 different people. Now, in the Western world, you have become selfish, closed-door individuals. You get in your lonely room to think of something to tell your analyst, but if you had some friends, you wouldn't need any analysts. Because African society was so open, if you couldn't talk to anybody else, you can talk to the village gospelist, who was always available. That was a good drain off. But we became a different people in this bind. All right. If the concept of slavery was starting in the world, it was a going concern among the Arabs 600 years before the Europeans, and if there were so many people in the world, why the choice of the African as against those other people, collectively more numerous than the African? The question is both ancient and current. Why is Africa more exploited right now than any other continent? Why do people willing to fight Africans and not willing to fight others? Why does Israel get more aid than all the African nations in the world put together? One nation in the total population of the Jews. The total world population is less than 1/2 of the black population in the United States. Why do they get so much attention, you get so little attention? They They got their political thing together. You haven't got yours together. They got their religious thing together and their cultural thing together. Religion and culture are servants of a people, and they convert it to service. With you, religion is religion. You don't make enough demands from anything, especially the people who take up your time and your resources. We are the true believers. We out Muhammad, out Pope to Pope. We believe in things in their purest form. Can't go to the right or the left. They say go to the center, we go to the center. So now we become the victims of our own culture as the needs of Europe began to expand. Now, let's look at the beginning of the tragedy.
I was supposed to be here early. They gave me another assignment. They didn't pick me up to go to the assignment. I followed their instructions and waited at the hotel. I would love to be here when I can be more fully in depth on this subject, because there's a whole lot of illusions about Africa's relationship with other people in the world. There's a whole lot of illusion about our relationship to the religions in the world. And these belief systems that had its origin in Africa, all of them, and there is no exception, turned on African people. I said there is no exception. And there's one thing you have to get through your mind and keep it. Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything but facilitate European domination of the world. And I said there's no exception. Everything that was brought into this continent, everything, every idea, every so-called religion was meant to dominate and to control. The Arabs had no illusions about it. The Europeans had no illusions about it. You were the ones with the illusions. And yet every element that went into the making of every major religion in the world started in Africa. Why is it that you are so naive? You let people redress something that you invented, sell it back to you, and enslave you through it. I'm saying that all organized present religions are male chauvinist murder cults. And I say there is no exception. Why I wanted to be here earlier, I wanted to deal with our relationship with the people of the world and the fact that we created peaceful nations that had no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one. No word for old people's home because no one ever threw them away, grandma and grandpa. No word for orphanages. We did all of this, and over half of human civilization was over before we knew that a European was in the world. Before he wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. Now, Africa has always and still is the prize for the whole world. We as a people have always been the world's richest people, culturally rich, mineral rich. We have always been the prize because we have always had and still have something that other people won't, think they can't do without, and don't care to pay for. Because we have always been the prize, we have been under siege for over 3,000 years. Nothing that ever brought into Africa from the outside was meant to do the African any good. That means all other religions. Islam was the handmaiden of Arab imperialism. Christianity was the handmaiden of European imperialism. The Hebrew faith was the handmaiden of a concept called the chosen people. Now, if God is kind and God is merciful and God has no stepchildren, he won't choose one over the other. And to say he chose some people, you're making him a bigot. And to say that he endorsed enslavement of one people over the other, you're making him an accessory to murder. The Arabs used Islam to rationalize their slavery and their imperialism. The Europeans used Christianity to rationalize their slavery and imperialism. Who are you kidding about friends in the world? Damn it, if you want a friend, look in the mirror. There's 1 billion African people on the face of this earth. Why are you buying third-rate junk from third-rate people thinking you can't make it? Why don't you at least make a safety pin to hold your child's diaper together? Teach. Who has programmed your mind into thinking you can't make a car? The first man that made a car that had never seen one previously. The Japanese bought cars, bought locomotives, broke them down and studied them, and had a Japanese technician produce each piece, put it together, and had a much better train than the one they copied from. All knowledge in the world belongs to everybody in the world. Yes. Who has programmed our mind in assuming that we cannot run a nation and run it well? The main thing imperialism did, slavery and imperialism, that they removed African people from the respectful commentary of history. And they tell them something they are still telling them, and all of the organized religions are guilty of this. I favor none of it because Africa didn't need any of it. I'm saying that African belief systems, properly understood, is 10 times better than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And better for the African. So you might have some romance with one of these religions. I have no romance with any of them. I have a romance with reality and truth. And the chips can fall where they may after I tell it. As for friends, you have had no friends. When they discovered you, they began to prey on you. Now let's look at our relationship with Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. For 3,000 years, our greatest enemies came from Western Asia. They were trying to avenge the fact that they were once African colonies. You read a book called When Egypt Ruled the East, and you get some of the basic information on this. Now, the first visitors to Africa came in the 1700s BC. These were the people who would later be called Hebrews. Now, black people are ticklish on this because black people think that everything in the Bible is true. I question the intelligence of anyone who thinks everything in the Bible is true or supposed to be true. It's allegory, stories told to illustrate a point at a time when there were very few people reading books. And most of what went into the making of the Bible was copied from Egyptian texts. Now, if you want to get so dewy-eyed over the Bible, which is a carbon copy of a carbon copy, why don't you go back and read the original Egyptian text? Then you see where all these stories started from. You see where the story of the Exodus started from. Now, you get so dewy-eyed, you actually think there was an Exodus. These people walked into Africa. Why couldn't they walk out? Why did they have to go by sea? Why did they see at the park? If you read Egyptian literature, you will discover that the whole story of somebody parting the sea started with about 3,000 years before the Hebrew entrance. I should not use the word Hebrew entrance, before the entrance from Western Asia. Now let's get one thing straight, because black people are confused about all religions. Now I'm not against any religion. I'm a very spiritual human being. I just don't need a preacher to preach no 10 commandments to me when he's a backslider going with some sister, some other man's wife. I'm intelligent enough to pick from the 10th commandment. We were not commandments anyway, but they were omissions of purity at the great school at Luxor, the great African training school. All right, now, let's get into this Western Asia. I'm saying that the people who came from Western Asia escaping famine did not have any Hebrew faith when they came into Africa. And there's no record of a Hebrew faith before there. Why is it that when they left Africa in the so-called Exodus, they had all three? African culture, an African religion, and an African language. Now look at the origin of the so-called people you now refer to as Jews. And you're mistaken using that reference because the word Jew is of European origin. And the people in Europe who call themselves by their name.
Now that is some positive discussion there, and I think the scholars there have really done justice to the question of whitewashing of history that has led to black Americans thinking that they are lesser beings, yet they are as important as other races within America. We have also had the question of one Christopher Columbus, who is credited to having discovered America and many other countries. Yet the question that these scholars are asking is, when Columbus was discovering America, was there no one living in America? And that question is really difficult to answer. And it is also easy to answer because automatically there were people living in that country. And therefore, we can't come here and start crediting Columbus for discovery of a country that existed with people and systems running. So that is also something that is very, very vital in this discussion. Another aspect that they have also touched is the question of slavery and how whites and also churches were used as tools for recruiting and even allowing slavery to take place across the world. Blacks in the United States faced a lot of challenges when it comes to slavery, as they were forced into labor without even proper payment and even proper amenities. So this is something that also these scholars are highlighting here. And I think having gone through that entire video, you will get to understand that there is a certain aspect of history that is always hidden from us. There are certain truths that we are always not told, because the white person may think that if a black person understands this, they may come out and do things that can really depose them of their ego that they always have against blacks. So that is it from me. So if you're watching us for the first time, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. And also give us your opinion down in the comment section so that we also understand your perspective about the issue. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.